A very good evening to everyone. I'm Namrata and I'm your host for the evening. I have Anindita with me. A hearty welcome to all the poets present with us here today. We have gathered to celebrate the 4th edition of Chair Poetry Evenings, Kolkata's International Poetry Festival. We have 20 poets among us and they have gathered to read their poems over 4 consecutive days starting today and ending on 24th of November. Since last year, in spite of the pandemic, we have been able to present some of the finest voices in the world of contemporary poetry. And this year, we have come a little ahead to present the program physically with poets joining us virtually from their places. Over the next few days of the festival, we would present 20 poets reading in more than 7 languages from around the world. So as our saying goes, let us listen, perceive and transform through words, through thoughts and through verses.
Poetry can heal us in many ways, and this event is our own way of giving back to the world it badly needs. And at times, it is the only thing that we need.
It is a test, says our dear poet Eliot, that genuine poetry can communicate before it is understood. With that resilient note, let us have the pleasure of listening to the first poet of today's evening, Ruth Padel. Joining us from London, we have Ruth Padel. Ruth is an award-winning British poet, Fellow of Royal Society of Literature and Professor of Poetry at King's College. She has published 12 acclaimed poetry collections, non-fictions on subjects ranging from Greek tragedy to wild tiger conservations, and 2 novels. Her latest poetry collection is called Beethoven's Variations. Dear all, Ruth Padel.
Greetings from London. My name's Ruth Padel, and I'm going to read a few poems and address poetry from the point of view of something that speaks to and from our inner lives, each of us, and to the inner lives, the inner imagination of our listeners and readers, but also speaks to the outer world, its problems and its delights, its turbulence, especially now, and anything that deeply troubles us in the outer world. I'm going to start with the more personal. This book, Emerald, was really an elegy for my mother. It was about her dying and death and then looking back on her. It's quite environmental in that it addresses green in all its forms and textures. My mother was a biologist and a great-granddaughter of Charles Darwin. So she was very involved in environmentalism, and she was a botanist. So that's why we have leaves on the cover. And I was thinking about that very much as I was writing the poems. But I started by researching emeralds, and then she sort of torpedoed the project by starting to die. And I was thinking with emeralds, what is value? Poetry addresses something that you value. Why do we value things? What do we value in them? How does the world, external world, value things? And emeralds are extraordinary. They are green stone that is found in carbon, miles below the earth. And my daughter, as it happens, is an anthropologist who works on Colombia and is married to a Colombian. So I've been there several times and I researched emeralds there. And one of the aspects of capitalism is that the people who make and produce and find the things that we value are paid the least. That may go for poets, but it also goes for emeralds because it's a horrible business being an emerald miner, and they don't get paid nearly as much as the people further down the line, of course. Carbon Labyrinth. If you're looking for love, try the mysteries of earth. Splash and crouch through running water, the pitch black sauna honeycomb of tunnels, molten as a cauldron, haunted by a dream of flashing absinthe, and the serpent scales of Melusine. Now you're blind. Here's torchlight, 100 black-smeared faces. Now you're deaf. 100 claw-point grabbers scratch and tease the roof. A call comes, here, and everyone stampedes. 1,000 jackhammers, 10,000 ricochets from a seam of dazzled green. Apple frost inside black stone. Mineral moss blossoming in the dark, capillaries of rock like unripe sugar crust. A marshlight whisper of fantasies embedded in the bone. Each swing of the pick might make your fortune. Oxygen levels plummet. No one cares. But this might prove the final rising into light, an open zip, the finally answered prayer. Because one small little piece of that glimmering stone found in the dark could make a man's fortune, could mean the difference for his family, his town. So when I was working on this book, I was due to go to Jaipur, and suddenly, before I was due to go, my mother was rushed to hospital with an aneurysm. And so, of course, I said I wasn't going to go, I was going to stay with her. She made me go. She could be very stubborn. She said she'd be fine. And so I did go, and I did do some emerald research there, because, of course, Jaipur was the great city. Once the emeralds had been found in Colombia in the 16th, 17th centuries, they were whizzed off to Spain, and then from Spain to Delhi and Jaipur. And Jaipur is the great emerald cutting centre. And it's a great art, because emerald is the most brittle of all the precious stones. Jaipur. I can't go to India, I said, with you in this state. Don't be silly. How can I go to Rajasthan through fog-bound Delhi, a 6-hour change of plane, with an exploding aneurysm hanging like the sword of Damocles in your back? She argued, insisted she would be okay, and sent me off. But how did I know I'd see her again? In the chaotic traffic of Jaipur, taxis on strike, taking an auto rickshaw to the old bazaar, pink-walled alleys, colour of embers in a fading sky, filling up with motorbikes, electric cables, open drawers of second-hand CDs, a hanging alphabet of export surplus shirts, and rhesus macaques running over red tile roofs in rubber masks. By the postern to the emerald dealer's yard, a baby monkey slid down a lamppost like a fireman, dashed across the street. She'd have cheered him on. The cutter, in his tucked-away white desk with a fluoride swing light. Emeralds, he said, are all about light. Had a milky eye, like a moonstone, something wrong since birth. He took linen pouches of raw gems out of hidden panels in the wall and poured them in my hand, while the dealer told the jewel story of his town. Owners, brokers, the old Jain trading castes, and emerald cutters, most of them Muslim. For hope can be found the other side of pain. Green is the colour of paradise. And for 500 years the Mughal emperors ordered enormous crystals up from obscure shafts beneath the carbon heart of the Andes. Pink City became Emerald City, adept in the unique cutting properties of emerald, the only stone in which the flaws are prized. She was right, of course. Still here when I got back to northern winter, early snowdrops, steel wool skies, the sun invisible burning somewhere else, Jaipur, and everyone anxious, shaky as a bubble in a carpenter's level. Signs taken for wonders, one hand upon the door. So the next collection I'm going to read from is from my Beethoven variations, which are poems on the life and music of Beethoven. And I'll just read a couple. One is really on the extraordinariness of his beginnings. He was born, as you know, I'm sure, in Bonn, in Germany, the son of an obscure musician who got very drunk and was not very gifted, but musician enough to know that he had a prodigy on his hands very young. If your father damaged you, the way meteorites spin in, clustering on Antarctic ice, bare shields of glacier burnished by ferocious wind, because your father is magnetite, dragging all the iron in your soul into his own force field. You seal yourself in. You need nothing but music. Your answer to obstruction will be fire. In the little hall of the house where you were born, the one original surface is dark silver flagstones where you might have crawled. Light falls in shallow hollows of deciduous rubbed stone, clogged with spume of cleaning fluid, where I imagine your mother carrying the shopping, your father staggering home drunk, up these stairs to wake you in the middle of the night, stand you for hours on a bench so you can reach the keys. You cry as you play, slapped if you make a mistake. In daylight, he hears you improvise. Splashing around, he calls it, on a violin. What rubbish are you scratching now? Isn't that beautiful? No, you made it up. You're not to do that. Stop, or I'll box your ears. If your father damaged you, the way fierce winds scour glacier ice where meteorites have fallen from heaven. But he was the one who made you, beat the notes into you on clavier, viola, violin. Your response to challenge ever after will be attack. You will need no one, only the relationship of sound and key. You improvise. So there's one of the astonishing things about that little story, which I tried to get into a poem, because poems can encapsulate the moment in such an extraordinary way and radiate out from it, is that improvising, which his father beat him for, was his ticket to success. It was through his improvising that he went to Vienna and became known for being a fantastic improviser on the piano, like a jazz improviser. But also the threat that the father made, what was it? To box your ears. And it was his ears that were the source of his great, great grief. And I'll do one more poem from Beethoven. And when he was going deaf, he was under 30, and for 6 years he sort of put up with it, and it got worse, and doctors didn't help. And he nearly committed suicide, and he decided to live for his art instead. And he came raging back from that decision and wrote the Eroica Symphony, which was this breakthrough moment, breakthrough of style, breakthrough of success. And of course, it is a heroic moment. He was thinking of Napoleon, but he was also thinking of himself. And in this, I'm thinking so much about poetry as something which breaks through from pain into creativity. Poetry and all art, of course, Beethoven's art, composition. Eroica. All night, I've been thinking of you careening down to the underworld. Now, with the resilience of a dervish, you rage back up from the depths and get a job as composer in a theatre. The man you hoped to be is disappearing into the horizon like a creature of sea ice. But you, a fire dust, gold flight, winching upwards into pure light, Napoleon the liberator, conqueror of the Alps. Battles are being won, smashing windows all over the city, making old Vienna look like a study of life on the ocean floor, while you drive forward into a new world dawn, thrilling with dissonance, calling up wild steel angels no one has met before, looking down on volutes of the foyer as on a dying fire. You are havoc on the brink, a jackhammer shattering the night and soaring past world sorrow. Against everything that can happen to you or anyone, you pitch experiment and the next new key, ever more remote. So the last book I'm going to read from is actually very dear to my heart because I've redone my book on migration to call it We Are All From Somewhere Else. I've updated it to the catastrophe in Syria, the risings in Syria and the crackdown and the terrible refugee crisis that is happening on a country where I've lived a lot, on Greece, on the front of Greece, the East Aegean. And I'll just read one poem from this. It's called The Place Without a Door. There was a camp at a place called Saint-Gat on the coast of France before the refugees trying to come over to Britain. And given our current hardline, horrible refugee policy, immigrant policy, it seems to me ever more important to remember that we are all from somewhere else. Whatever native is, we all came originally from primeval slime, and then we all came out of Africa, or possibly Borneo or somewhere. We are all originally from somewhere else, wherever rooted we feel we are, and we owe it to people who have to leave their country to welcome them. And every religion has a thread in it of welcoming the stranger. And while poetry never stops a tank, as Seamus Heaney said, and poetry makes nothing happen, as Auden said, poetry can still give a voice to the displaced, the dispossessed, and those in need, and reach out to the other, which seems to me to be one of the most important aspects of poetry. The place without a door. Listen. There are dragons under cities, monsters in white spaces on sea maps. Saint-Gat is a commune on the coast of France, facing water which the English call English Channel. A border for which many men, and women too, have died. The name means gap in sand. When we were there, we knew it was the place without a door. Mark the spot in my brother's heart where he built a cardboard shrine for our wasteland jungle. Check the wall where someone graphed "Nous voulons de l'air pour nos enfants." The cement octagons where we hid at night to rush the axle of Spanish lorries. The bridge where my brother jumped that train. into the tongue. So thank you very much for listening, and I wish you all very good heart and delight in all the poetry you're going to hear.
Forrest Gander hails from America. He is a poet, translator, novelist, and essayist. Gander won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 2019 for Be With, and is Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets. He is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. His new collection, Twice Alive, came out in May this year at New Directions. Let's hear his words now.
Hi, I'm Forrest Gander. It's a pleasure, a blessing really, considering the company, to find myself reading for Kolkata's International Literary Festival. I'm going to be sharing 3 poems as poetry videos that I've made from my most recent book, Twice Alive. And I'll also include one even newer poem, which is embedded in a fragment of a 20-minute film called Whose Utopia? By Chow Fei. Unto ourselves. To see what's there and not already patterned by familiarity. For an unpredicted whole is there, casting a pair of shadows, manipulating its material, advancing, assembling enough kinship that we call it life, our life, what is already many lives, the dimensions of its magnitude veiled to us as we live it. Across the cytoplasm of adjacent cells goes a signal that turns you toward me, turns me into you. We are coupled in quiet tumult, convergent arguments, an alien rhythm becoming familiar, a rhythm of I am here, never to be peeled away. We are become one thing, listening for what's there and not. Through the storm, neem trees on the hill stamp wildly in their roots. We have passed through the spring, but what thing has passed through us? Now your laughter transparentizes me, and whose sense of the self doesn't swerve? Your unconditional foreignness grows conditional, stops being foreign at all. With your nearness, my lens on the world shifts. A peristaltic contraction courses through us as a single wave. No longer can we keep our distance, our lips brush, or the tips of ourselves. But what language are you whispering to me, your teeth stained by Nilgiri tea, above the trills and whistles in the high limbs, above the screech of a bulldozer blade, shoving rubble up the wounded street, above the silence of an eyeless tick climbing a grass stem? I understand nothing but the lust your voice incites, the declamatory tenderness. How and who can say what force has queued up this hour for our small voices to merge into a carnality that did not exist before now? Come to this unforeseen conjunction. We slip into one another. We take hold in a pulse of heat, in a yes and no, for already we can see we are no longer what we were. As I find you within me, not fused, not bonded, but lodged. And for you, is it the same? The intensity of such investment, each of us excited by the volatility of the other, which propels us in a rush as something, perhaps our lips brush or the tips of ourselves, stripping away what was before? Was there even anything before? The reconfiguration is instantaneous experience. It is being itself. But whose being now? Was I endowed with some special pliability so that becoming part of you, I didn't pass through my own nihilation? And what does the death of who you were mean to me? except that now you are present constantly. Because excess is what it took for us to transform, to effulge. You cast your life beyond itself. Can't you sense me with your ecstatic openness, like rain mingling with red earth? Without you I survived, and with you I live again in a radical augmentation of identity, because we have effaced our outer limits, because we summoned each other. In you, I cast my life beyond itself. Behind it all, the ratcheting arterial pulse of machinery. My pupils are fixed in place, as though by needles, on the task at hand. At hand, synovials of tungsten filament, contact wire, gas-filled glass bulbs, and orchestral clinking, until, as though called forth from my collective hours of concentration, some afterbirth of monotony, the unpredicted enters the room like a pair of gods sheathed in silence, miracles of precarity, rupturing the membrane between habit and dream. He with his swiveling step, she pulling back her shoulders. Their inner stillness adds magnanimity to their motions, uncanny, pre-hypnotic, incomprehensible. Mustard flowers waving in a charred field. How can I look away? My eyes have no lids. If I grant them just a minute of my attention, I wonder if I could emerge from what has shattered inside me. Post-fire forest. Shadows of shadows without canopy, phalanxes of carbonized trunks and snags, their inner momentum shorted out. They surround us in early morning like plutonic pillars, like mute clairvoyance leading a sursum corda, like the excrescence of some long slaughter. All that moves is mist lifting, too indistinct to be called ghostly. From scorched mycelial layers of rain-moistened earth, what remains of the forest takes place in the exclamatory mode. Cindered utterances in a tongue from which everything trivial has been volatilized, everything trivial to fire. In a notch between near hills, stubbled with black paroxysm, we spot a familiar sun, liquid glass globed at the blowpipe's tip. If this landscape is dreaming, it must dream itself awake. You have, everyone notes, a rare talent for happiness. I wonder how to value that, walking through wreckage. On the second day, a black-backed woodpecker answers your call, but we search until twilight without finding it.
Robin Singh Ngangom is from Imphal, Manipur, India. He is a bilingual poet who writes in English and Manipuri. He studied literature at St. Edmund's College and the Northern Eastern Hill University, Shillong, and serves as a lecturer in the Department of English at NEHU. He is the editor of New Frontiers, Journal of the Northeast Writers Forum, Guwahati, and is nominating editor for Manipuri for Katha Translation Awards, New Delhi. He was conferred with Katha Award for Translation in 1999, was invited to the UK for the UK Year of Literature and Writing 1995, and the Udaya Bharati National Award for Poetry in 1994. His significant publications are Words and the Silence, published by Writers' Workshop, Calcutta, 1988, an anthology of New Indian English poetry published by Rupa and Company, New Delhi, 1993. Times Crossroads, Disha Books Orient Longman Limited, Hyderabad, 1994. Khasia in Gwalior, Alun Books, Wells, 1995. A new book of Indian poems in English, published by Writers' Workshop, Calcutta, 2000. Anthology of Contemporary Poetry from the Northeast, NEHU Publications, Shillong, 2003. And Confronting Love Poems, Penguin Books India Private Limited, New Delhi, 2005. So dear friends, let's hear to Robin saying Ngangom.
Many thanks to Sonnet Mondal, a fine poet in his own right, for asking me to read my poems in this prestigious poetry festival. My first poem is titled Middle Class Blues. A middle class man wakes up on a middle class morning and has his middle class tea and biscuits. Last night he dreamt of being an aristocrat, but today he is afraid of falling below the poverty line. The middle class never begets rebels. No one is rich enough to feel guilty about the poor, or poor enough to reach that breaking point. A middle class man merely wants to save his money, troubling no one and expecting no trouble in return. Though he fell in love during his pre-industrial youth, he eventually married a middle-class bride and dutifully buys his middle-class fish, constantly checking his middle-class watch. On occasion, he may wear his single suit, but you can tell him by his body odor and his shoes. Although he may drive his middle-class car and build his middle-class house, after scrimping and saving all his lowbrow working life. And although the irony will be lost on him, it's his money that keeps a democracy well-oiled, because he pays his war taxes and earthquake dues without a murmur of dissent. And his grandfather Grimbeard, who was buried in an English churchyard, said, "Many hold him in contempt for his petty bourgeois ways." Ah, it's as well that the petty bourgeois never became rich or noble and were spared the delusion. This one has much to do with my boyhood in Manipur. Home. Slippery paths between heart and head, that home for the aged. A brother who held his hand to the hilltop where a shrine to a benign goddess stood, until his brother let go of his hand. A sister who sang 60s pop while dancing the twist across his marveling eyes until her mind twisted with forgetting. A river that raged and hypnotized him like a small prey with swirling brown waters until it died, strangled by garbage. a wasp nesting attic where he pored over stolen adult books until the attic flew away one night with his fantasies. A pillow inside which he hid his first letter of love, a star's droppings. This is a prose poem titled Funerals and Marriages. Or maybe it should be the other way around, marriages and funerals. I've stopped going to marriages and funerals. Any demonstration of grief or joy unnerves me. Solemnity withers me, and dark sartorial elegance moves no one. It is not that I have forgotten kindness or to wish people happiness if they can find it. I could help the bereaved furtively after the mourners have eaten and left. I have become truly unsociable. I can't fathom why anyone would like to be comforted except by people they love selfishly. You only need hugs and kisses from people who give you, when pressed, your morsel of flesh. I cannot be comforted except by the woman I love illicitly. I often wonder about the efficacy of marriages and funerals. Could it be because others are as worried as I was during my own wedding feast that my friends would not show up for some mystifying reason? As regards funerals, I know that if the house of the dead cannot keep a demonic hold on me, my absence will not make any difference. But I don't want to be censured for not attending marriages or funerals. I wish people would not invite me to weddings or bring news of an old acquaintance's death. If I could, I wouldn't attend even my own funeral. I remember the day I returned home, and without even seeing my father, I went to my aunt's house when I heard my cousin had died during my long absence. I tried to match my aunt's grief by showing some tears in my eyes, but ended up sniffing like a dog. After that, my cousin's sister, my other lovely cousin, in whose body I first sang a liquid tune, gave me pineapple to eat, and we smiled at each other. I used to dip my hands into her blooming breasts, a pair of frightened pigeons. But later, my dead cousin appeared in my dreams to play and protect me again, as he did during our childhood. He took a long time to go away, and I had to spit 3 times to make sure that he wouldn't haunt me. I remember this film about slum dwellers in Bombay, and how after the tears and the burning, they would bring out their bottles of orange liquor and get drunk and have a real ball. That's one funeral I would like to attend. Finally, two short poems written in response to the pandemic. Forgetting. When we become forgetful, we cannot remember what gives us pause on days which seem to never end. To forget is to die once more through Moses' Egypt to the Wuhan spectacle. Creatures, animate or not, still journey on bravely, slighting borders, coal, dazed refugees, torpedoes, mountain goats. Even as pestilence brokers have begun roaring, the economy is dead, long live the economy. We notice streets bereft of children, luxury yachts for the first time, while a goods train leisurely flattens a curve of migrant workers, and snow-crowned peaks swim into view daily on grimy streets. We cannot mask an ineffable fear. Unlike emperor penguins marching in a dignified line toward extinction. Day. I walk in a backyard in fear of a street's air. Within an instant's perimeter, no longer in conversation with bluebirds or camouflaged moths, but only a prisoner allowed the little sun during a prolonged sentence, praying each dawn for the mindless numbers to drop, so that a primeval need may be restored to us, the ability to hold another before the day ends. Thank you.
Joining us from Paris, we have Aurelia Lazak. She is a bilingual poet writing in French and Occitan. Occitan is an endangered language spoken in parts of South France, Italy, and Spain. Aurelia is one of the major voices of Occitan contemporary poetry and has dedicated her doctoral dissertation to Occitan theatre from 17th century. She has performed all over the world in Europe, Latin America, North Africa, Scandinavian countries, Indonesia, and India. She is an active advocate of linguistic diversity and acts as a literary advisor for the Paroles Indigo Festival in Arles and the Premio Ostana Scripture in Lingua Madre, Italy. Her most recent books are Connivances 4, Editions de la Marguerite, a poetry artist book in dialogue. Her last poetry collection, granted by the CRL Midi-Pyrénées in Tic d'un Visage, went out in May 2017 at Editions Bruno Rausi. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear from Aurelia Lazak.
Hello, this is Aurelia Lazak from France. I'm really happy to participate to chair Poetry Evening. I would like to thank Sonnet Mandal for the invitation and all the Indian crew, and say hi to all the other poets and to the audience. I am from France, but right now I am in Georgia at Tbilisi International Literature Festival, and I take this opportunity to say that Georgia is a wonderful country, and to thank the people of the Writers' House in Tbilisi for their warm welcome. I am from France, but I write bilingually in French and Occitan. Occitan being the language of the medieval troubadours, which is it's a Roman language and actually really endangered in southern France, spoken in Spain, southern France and Italy. I read partly in French and partly in Occitan. Those poems are extracted from a collection, a book called En quête d'un visage, In Search of a Face. The translations that you are going to read are done by Madeleine Campbell. Elle. Tout ceci est de mémoire profane. Les poètes ont tout réinventé. Il fallait un homme qui surpasse les dieux et qui, comme tout homme loin de sa maison, si souvent en larmes, maudisse la mer vineuse, se griffe le visage. Quand le poète est mort, 10 autres ont pris sa place et ont réécrit l'histoire. Ainsi l'homme a engendré le mythe. J'ai cloué l'espoir aux 4 murs de ma cellule. Il n'est pas de territoire plus vaste que celui de ma mémoire. J'ai creusé ces montagnes, vidé ces rivières, retourné les pierres de toutes ces murailles, en attendant le retour de mon amant barbare, cet homme qui rassemble vos voix, endure vos délires et porte tous les masques, cet homme que vous appelez Ulysse. Le soleil s'est levé. Le garçon lui murmure ses commandements. Non loin de lui est agenouillée celle qu'il aime. Les bras enfouis dans le sable, elle creuse. Le garçon prie que l'on se souvienne de son nom, que l'on s'en souvienne jusqu'au dernier homme, qu'Ulysse soit le dernier homme. Puis il saisit le soleil à pleine main, le mort, et le crible de rire. Elle n'a pas besoin d'entendre ses prières pour savoir de quoi sont faits les rêves d'Ulysse. Alors elle creuse, à la manière d'un animal que l'orage rend furieux. Un labyrinthe. Elle voudrait pouvoir y retenir le soleil, que la mer soit complice. Elle y dépose de petites statues d'argile, une pour elle, une pour Ulysse, ils se tiennent par la main. Il y a une noce. Mais le labyrinthe est de sable. Chaque matin, il faut tout recommencer. Et quand vient l'heure de la noce, elle jure 2 fois. And now I switch to Occitan. Ello. L'iskro servo lairegos des rires baucis de trolles benguts del larg. All'umbro de staulies m'ensegnavos tus jocs. Habían pa de sang carreggiavos de tresaus in taspoccios traucados. As ausols de la ribo, panavos de fials per i passati peiros in furmo d'arselli. Lui peisi s'eran borni se la fruccio troppo amaro che pausavos tremulando alla bruno a finestro. L'ulibiabio in nu, che t'avio fisat come l'alfabet, che s'engravo al freccial l'arbere mestre de l'ainaus. I ventani in per l'autre di storios fantasticos, y había de balenos de la lengua curioso, y había tas paraulos ornados de sal, y nostros lagremos vertadieros, can l'estiu tresculandus rendió estranger l'un a l'autre. Ulisses. Te voli retrubadrollo, ritruva que lei giur diventados que scalpravon ta cabeladuro de saplo e de sal. All'aro gagnavos maccauno da passet, che rimiresse ta coffo e ta minescherro. Parlavos pa mai, fazios de gestes larc, l'ussulel di tuneschino fazios moure las umbros ta pelavireino. Volinguriamas mande drolle d'arietanucco, purtata caro come in calissi danza come in sec. Voli fregato un pe di nappusco freddo e che tu rire mi devore. Voli dormir cambello se crai cabros da valennu serre per annunziare la sero. Te voli veire parti e demurar sul per reculier al brugget lai campanos animalos lai perlos de saplo e de sal casudos de tus pelses. Ello. Cado nuec, lumetei sauracce, e innagavo lus esteus de capelets de drolles crevan l'escureso de l'urca calassis blanc. Dintama, servavos la meuno, a immabita sarrado, eros pas homme encaro, mas c'ha promessa la guerra. Eros un animal mainacce, innuran lutas del sang, e desirrabil, tamusegado. In French. Elle. Chaque nuit, le même orage inondait les récifs de chapelets d'enfants crevant l'obscurité de leurs grands rires blancs. Tu retenais ma main et j'aimais ton étreinte. Tu n'étais pas homme encore, mais déjà promis à la guerre. Tu étais mon animal enfant, ignorant le goût du sang, et je désirais ta morsure. Ulysse. Tu disais Ulysse dans un murmure, au-dedans de mes paumes, en promenant ta langue et son parfum de figue sur mes maigres offrandes. Tu parlais au futur, et je craignais cette folie, l'humidité sur ton front et tes veilles nocturnes, comme si tu avais gardé pour toi le secret du feu, comme s'il t'appartenait de choisir quand et à quel dieu sacrifier la flamme. Ulisses. Dizios Ulisses, dis un murmul, al dedín de mas paumos, e passeggiavos ta lengues un perfum de figo, su mai magros ofrendos. Parlavos al futur, e crenioi aqueste pauciun, la mustu sul teu frun et tas bellios negencos, como s'ave observat per tu, lo secret del fioc, como se dependio de tu curo, e a quin diu sacrifica la flammo. This is it. I wish you nice readings, and thanks again to Chair Poetry Evening for inviting me. Bye bye.
I will now be reading a poem by Aurelia Lazak, translated into English by James Thomas. A House of Stone. A house of stone and linen curtains, tinted by rays of light and dust. The ocean, stretching to the horizon, peers through the window. Inside the house, a woman, a virgin still, her ashen hair, teased by winds from the high sea, dances with the evening. On the table, her old, well-folded trousseau catches her eye just as the night birds start to sing. Lois P. Jones is from America, and her first collection of poetry, Night Ladder, was published in 2017 by Glass Lyre Press. Her awards include 2021 Bridgeport Poetry, the Lassaque Poetry Prize, the Bristol Poetry Prize, and the Tiferet Poetry Prize. Her work has been published in Guernica Editions, Narrative, Verse Daily, Tupelo Quarterly, and others. She is the poetry editor for Kyoto Journal and host of Pacifica Radio's Poets Cafe on KPFK podcast. Jones has edited several poetry anthologies, including Carrying the Branch, Poets in Search of Peace, and Volume 2 of Aeolian Harp Poetry Folios. She reads for Claremont University Kingsley Tufts Annual Awards. Let us now hear from Lois P. Jones.
Hello, my name is Lois P. Jones. It's a joy to be with you at the Chair Poetry Evenings for Kolkata's International Poetry Festival. I want to thank you, especially Sonnet Mandel, for inviting me, And I really look forward to hearing all of the participants. And I want to thank each listener for your presence here tonight. I'm going to start with a poem that I wrote last year, right after COVID hit. I was walking around my favorite gardens in La Cañada. It's called Descanso Gardens. And I came across this stone bridge, and someone had left all of these camellias on the top of the stone bridge. And it was right around the time when we were told not to touch anything, not to come near anyone, the 6 feet of distance that precluded us from being close to one another. And I thought about how someone had laid these out carefully as a kind of invitation. It's called In a Time of Corona, with a line from Joanna Klink. I left camellias for you by the stone bridge, pink into white petals, circling the multitudes of ovules, yellow as late corn. I did not pluck them like a feather thief from their leathery beds, but gathered blooms from where they'd fallen and scattered their bodies across the capstones. Don't be afraid to touch them. The day will always be full of reasons to stop breathing. Lie down. Lie down and feel the rivers shift blue veins through soil. Place a petal on each eye. Let them blush you into waking. Let them say you met my passing with a kiss. Their skins soft and veined as yours. I've been thinking a lot about the idea of blessings and what is a blessing, and how sometimes something comes in obliquely and you think this is a terrible thing, and you find out in its way it can be a blessing if it causes us to have more awareness about something. This is called Blessings, Part 1. In Argentina, at the finca of an old heiress, I was offered a prized Tempranillo, the wine black as the dreams of earthworms. You have never tasted a land like this, she said. On her mantle, a menagerie of saints and small crystal icons, the colors of the sea. She watched me with a thirst for salvation, as the girl nearby rocked with one foot in the underworld and her ache to get out of it. Her mouth offering its creaks and moans, how everyone looked away as her cries grew louder, pushing her oars in the air, stirring the room with her storm, until she crossed to hold my hand and calm. 2. My neighbor was from the old country, her babushka the color of a bezoar goat. She came toward me on Ash Wednesday as if I were an apparition, a saint appearing like a gift in her garden. Her bones had already lost their breath, and her eyes held the remains of villages. Children too small to walk the long road, parents strapping them in boxes on the sides of donkeys, babies and the old dying without water or shelter. Places where the danger hadn't passed. At 13, I wanted to be a nun, to love without need to filter resin from the grape. I was called to the church more than once. The Church of Innocence, the Church of the Psychotic Father, the Church of Womanhood, the Church of Poetry and its illuminated manuscripts. They've all burned down except for one in this half-finished heaven. I clarify wine no more than I'm a saint my neighbor needs. Still, I smile down at her, not understanding Armenian, only the gesture as her hand hovers from my right to left shoulder. Am I dead or blessed? I cannot bring back her ancestors. 3. Bless the boy who shot the boy, then pointed at his own temple with an automatic pistol, the mind's nave closing over the steel chamber. Each bullet handmade by the father who was found dead on the floor by his boy 2 years before. Bless the mothers, swans turned upside down, necks reaching toward the moss of the seabed. Bless the 10,000 souls who gathered in Santa Clarita to grieve the ghosts, the many who gave thousands to the shooter's mother, the ones who said, we must continue to bless all the empty beds. 4. For David White. Didn't it seem as if the nave of the church grew as tall as a eucalyptus, our silence a mist hovering above its crown? And didn't it feel as if he were holding our silence from across the podium, certain as his linen shirt, as he looked out at the pews, his eyes reaching into our gorges of loss, our fractured thoughts of a nation split down its middle. A thought of the Baruch, which says God is the true source of all blessings, but I have been kissed on the cheek, and it was a small rain that left nothing but thoughts of what it was and wasn't. As if a tree pressed lips to skin, its green skirting the house of you, sweeping from room to room, filling the floorboards with its breath, your walls becoming water, the body forgetting it carried anything at all. I'd like to continue with a couple of poems from my book, Night Ladder, which is here, out on Glass Lyre Press. And the first poem I'd like to read is called Unmarked Grave. Federico Garcia Lorca has often been described as one of the greatest Spanish poets. He's believed to have been, well, he was executed by the Franco-backed soldiers near his home of Granada in 1936, and his remains have never been found. So this is called Unmarked Grave. It starts with an epigraph from him. All I want is a single hand, a wounded hand, if that is possible. Beautiful man, with your brows of broken ashes and eyes that migrate in winter, a hollow in your hand where the moon fell through. I could have kissed your mouth, passed an olive with my tongue, the aftertaste of canaries on our breath. But the shriek of the little hour is spent, and there is no road back. The day it happened, there were no good boys or dovecots filled with virgins, just a sun imploding like a sack of rotten oranges, the scent of basil from the grove near your home, and the piano that still waits for you. No one will remember the coward who shot you, but the sheets, the white sheets you sail on, coming home. The next poem I'd like to read is, actually I'm going to read from my new series, which is based on Rilke's housekeeper. She lived with him for the last 6 years of his life at Museau, from about 1921 to 1926. And she had actually written a memoir of her time with him. I found the memoir in a library. I had it translated by a wonderful woman by the name of Eva West. And so this is one of the poems from the series. It's called Only the Moon Holds Her Exits and Entrances, Museau, 1921. I don't believe what my body says, the whole of me too tall for most men, my voice a wounded animal, a body that holds forks and knives and pokers for the fire, blue coals alive as dusk. I don't believe its cries and moans and cracks of thunder hushed between the lips. If an orchid transforms from hard bulb by the grace of rain and light, let it find flowering in the moist ground of your silence. Let it bloom not from photosynthesis, but desire. And let this body enter holding love under the tongue, its sublingual light, a faint disk against the shift to rose, dissolving and lighting this throat. Let the body be the beautiful dark butterfly coming expressly towards you from the dimly shining windows in a ballroom of guests. Let me slip between the cracks of your closed door to be touched the way the butterfly holds your finger, landing soft as sorrow, as rain. I think I'll finish with this last poem. So I found this marvelous quote. Apparently, Rilke liked to don his maid gloves and walk about the house, feeling things through the glove. So this is called Frida's Glove, Chateau Museau, summer 1922. She comes downstairs and finds him with her glove. The epigraph is actually from The Poetics of Space by Bachelard, and it reads, "The poet Rilke enjoyed donning his maid's suede gloves and dusting furniture in the wee hours of the morning, like caressing the body of a lover. After this, he said, 'There's nothing that you do not know.'" There was a candle burning inside my brow. I could not pinch its flame, so I crept out of the fevered bed to the forest of our floors, and they're cool against my feet. Green and green again, emerald like buttons sewn on our felt tree. It was just a hand at first, moving up the velvet drapes, independent as a whistle from nowhere. And then the thin figure of a man emerged slightly from the stage, the fingers and thumb gliding up the drape's edge. There was something at the wrist, a thickness between the fingers like a new skin, a fourchette with a slight webbing that layered the delicate hand. My suede glove touched an edge, then moved slowly up the plaited cord, then down. A finger drew the line of its own profile from forehead to neck. and I felt as if he traced my own throat, down to the clavicle, then up again to the edge of my left lobe. Shivering, the moon shook too, so sewn to the poet's mind that the fabric of our scene tilted, then buried itself in the night scene. Thank you.